Welcome once again, my friends, and thank you for stopping by to listen to an old storyteller. Today we have a story from the Seneca Indians of North America, and the title of this story is The Thunder Boy. A poor old woman lived in a smoky little cabin in the woods. She was only skin and bones, and she cried all the time, both day and night. Her blanket was so old and dirty that nobody could have told what kind of skin it was made of. This old woman had had 7 daughters. 6 had been carried off, one after another, and the 7th daughter had died. The daughter who died had been buried some time when one night her mother heard crying. She took a torch and going out towards the grave found a naked baby. She wrapped the baby in her blanket and took it home. The baby, a little boy, grew very fast. One day when the grandmother came home from gathering wood, he was not in the house, and she couldn't find him. That night there was a storm with thunder and lightning. In the morning, when the child came back, the grandmother asked, "Where have you been, my grandson?" "I have been with my father. He took me home with him." "Who is your father?" "Thunder is my father. He took me home first. Then we came back, and we were around here all night." "Was my daughter your mother?" asked the old woman. "She was," answered the boy, "and Thunder is my father." The old woman believed her grandson. As the boy grew, he often made a noise like the noise of thunder, and whenever thunder came to the neighborhood, the child went out and helped his father. He was Thunder's son. After a time, the boy asked his grandmother where his 6 aunts were, and she said, "Far from here there is a mother and son who live by playing dice. Your aunts went there with a company of people. They played, were beaten, and their heads were cut off. Many men and women have gone to the same place and have lost their heads." "I will go and kill that woman and her son," said the boy. The grandmother tried to keep him at home, but he wouldn't stay with her. He was ragged and dirty. He asked her to make him 2 pairs of moccasins. She made them, and for a pouch she gave him the skin of a flying squirrel. The boy started off towards the west, and after a while he came to a large opening where there was a bark house with a pole in front of it, and on the pole hung a skin blanket. He heard a great noise and saw that at one end of the opening old men were betting and boys were playing ball. When people saw him, one said to another, "Who is that boy? Where did he come from?" Soon an old man went up to Thunder's son, gave him a club, and asked him to play. He played ball so well that the same man came to him and said, "We want you to play dice. My people will bet on you." "I don't know how to play dice," answered the boy. "We will risk our heads on you," said the man. Young Thunder followed the old man to the pole that stood by the bark house. The betting woman was sitting there on an elk skin. In front of her was a white stone bowl as smooth as glass. Thunder's son knelt down beside the bowl. The woman said, "You must play first." "No," said he, "you must play first." The woman took up her dice, which were round and made of stone. She blew on them, threw them into the bowl, shook the bowl, and called out, "Game! Game!" The dice flew up into the air, became crows, and cawed as they went out of sight. Soon they came down, cawing. As they touched the bowl, they were stones again. The woman had 3 plays in which to get a count of 17. She threw 3 times, but made no score. Then young Thunder took dice out of his pouch made of the skin of a flying squirrel. The woman insisted on his using her dice, but he refused. He put his dice into the bowl and shook the bowl. The dice became wild ducks and flew into the air. The ducks went very high. All the people heard them as they rose. When they came down and touched the bowl, they were stones and scored 10. Thunder shook the bowl again and called, "Game! Game!" The old woman called, "No game! No game!" The ducks flew up, and when they came down they scored another 10. He tried a third time and scored 10. Then he called to the people to come and see him cut off the head of the betting woman. "Wait," said the woman. "You must play ball with my son. If he loses, he will lose his head." Thunder asked the old men what he should do. Seeing how powerful he was, they said, "Play." He went to the ball ground. He was ragged and looked very poor. Only the two played. Thunder's son sprang forward and knocked the club out of Panther's hand. The young man ran for his club, but before he could get it, Thunder's son sent the ball through the goal. This was repeated 7 times, and Thunder's son won the game. Then he said to the people, "Now you can destroy the old woman and her son." They did. Then the young boy said, "I am going to bring my grandmother to this place, and we will have this long house to live in." As he traveled toward home, he sang praises of himself, and his grandmother heard him when he was a long way off. When he came to the cabin, he told her what he had done and said, "We must go there and live in the long house." She made ready and started, but it took a long time to reach the place, for friends went with them. When all had settled in houses built around the opening, Thunder's son called the people to the long house for a dance. The grandmother threw away her old blanket and put on the clothes left by the gambling woman, and then she looked like a young girl. After a time, Thunder's son went off with Thunder, his father, and stayed with him all winter. When spring came, the grandmother was uneasy about the boy, but one day she heard thunder off in the west, and soon her grandson came to the cabin. "Where have you been?" asked she. "On a great mountain far off in the west. I have been with my father, helping the nations and protecting men." The boy stayed with his grandmother that spring and summer. Once in a while, when it began to storm, he went away, but he always came back when the storm was over. The two lived a long time in this way, but at last the boy said, "You have a brother living in the west. Some wizard stole him from you. I must go and find him." And he went west to look for his uncle. Thunder's son traveled till he came to a cabin. In the cabin a woman was sitting by a fire. When he asked where his uncle was, she wouldn't answer. Taking his war club from his pouch, he struck her on the head and killed her. Then he went out and walked around the house, mourning and looking for his uncle. At last he heard a man groaning. He looked up in the trees, for he couldn't see anyone on the ground, but the man was not in a tree. He followed the sound and soon came to a large slippery elm tree. A man lay under the tree. He was held down by the great roots. His head came out between 2 roots on one side and his feet between 2 roots on the other side. The tree stood on the middle of his body. He was calling to his nephew to give him a smoke. Thunder's son said, "Oh, my poor uncle, how badly off you are! I will give you a smoke right away." He kicked the tree over, saying, "Rise up, uncle." The man stood up at once and was well. Thunder's son took out his pouch and gave the old man a stone pipe and Indian tobacco, and he grew strong. Then he told his nephew how a woman had enticed him to go with her. Then she ate him up and put his bones under the elm tree. The uncle and nephew went to the long house. The old grandmother was surprised and glad, and the 3 lived happily together till one day the nephew went off in a storm, and when the storm was over he brought back a wife. Then, when he went off with a storm, his wife was uneasy. The woman didn't know where she was from. In a terrible storm, Thunder's son had brought her home on his back. After a time she had a son, and when the boy was old enough to run around, the uncle, whose bones had laid under the elm tree, began to teach him, and soon the child was able to make a noise like a roar of thunder. One day the child followed his mother out of the house. He had a little dog, and that followed too. As the boy was running along, somebody seized him and rushed off. The dog ran after him, and, jumping to snatch him away, caught hold of his feet and pulled off his moccasins. The dog carried the moccasins home. When the mother saw the moccasins, she knew that her boy was gone. The father was off in the storm. When he came home, the woman asked if he had taken the boy away. "I have not," said he. "Oh, he is lost! He is lost!" cried the woman. "He is safe," said Thunder's son. "He has many relatives around the world, uncles and cousins." The boy was gone all winter, but one day in spring he came home with his father. Then Thunder's son said to his family, "We must all go and live with my father." The old grandmother said, "I can't go. It is far, and I am old." "I will carry you," said the grandson. Then Thunder's son began to thunder, and lightning flew around. The long house was torn to pieces and blazed up in flames. All the rocks and houses and trees in the opening were destroyed. Thunder's son and his people rose up in the air. The east wind blew, and it bore them to the high mountain in the west, and there they found old Thunder. And to this day the Thunder family live on that mountain in caves and among rocks. Thank you once again for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this story, please press that like button. Also, please help an old storyteller out by subscribing to my channel. The next story will be posted in a few days, so until then, may your story continue to be a good one.